Rick Rubin, of course, is a world-renowned producer, having worked with everybody from Slayer to Tom Petty to Public Enemy. I mean, we'd be here all day long listing his resume, the legendary acts that he's worked with. Rick Rubin, obviously very well-respected, and of course, very much deservedly so. However, that does not mean that everybody has had a great time working with him. And Pete Townshend from The Who is just the latest, and not too long, but a little bit of a list of artists that could not stand working with Rick Rubin, which I do want to preface the Pete Townshend thing, which I'll get into in a second. You know, they haven't exactly, to my knowledge, I don't think they've worked together before, at least not on anything publicly. So I'm not quite sure why Pete Townshend brought up Rick Rubin, but nonetheless, there are some people that have worked with Rick Rubin over the years. Not a fan of his work, and as you'll see throughout the video, this sort of the running theme is that most artists really take issues, not with him personally. Most people speak rather highly of him as an individual. The issues tend to come into play with his style and his tactics and how he likes to operate. But anyways, just recently, Pete Townshend was doing an interview on the Rock and Tours podcast where he was discussing just the creative process overall. He brought up Rick Rubin when he said, "You see a lot of stuff on YouTube and Instagram, people nagging you about the way that you have to be creative. Somebody needs to occasionally slap Rick Rubin because one minute he's telling us that we need to do whatever we like, and then on the other hand, he's telling us that we mustn't do this and we mustn't do that." To be fair though, Townshend did go on to briefly speak somewhat positively about Rubin when he added, "As Rick Rubin so rightly says, and many other pundits about creativity, it has to be fun. It has to be enjoyable. It has to be something that you love to do, and it also has to be something that you like what you do. But it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody else will like it." Again, I'm not quite sure how or why the Rubin topic came up. Again, I don't think the two have ever worked on anything, at least publicly, but one of the artists that immediately comes to mind that has an issue with Rick Rubin is, of course, Taylor from Slipknot. Rick Rubin produced Volume 3, The Subliminal Verses, and in the near 20 years since that album was released, which, God, that makes me feel old as shit, but Corey has been very vocal about his dissatisfaction when working with Rick Rubin, and there was an interview back in 2008 that Revolver did with Corey Taylor, Jim Root, and Clown, where they asked about the experience of working with Rick Rubin on that album, where Corey said, "I wouldn't know what it's like to work with Rick Rubin. I only saw him about 4 times. Rick Rubin is a nice man. He's done a lot of good for a lot of people. He didn't do anything for me. I'm not happy with the vocals on that record. There were a lot of takes that I thought were much better than the ones they fucking used, and I wasn't asked about a lot of shit. It sounds amazing, the songs are great, but we were being charged horrendous amounts of money. And for me, if you're going to produce something, you're fucking there. I don't care who you are." What's interesting though is that in that same interview with Revolver, both Clown and Jim Root gave Rick Rubin quite a bit of praise, with Clown even saying that Rick Rubin is like the Oracle, and Jim Root referring to Rubin as the big brother on the hill, just kind of overseeing things and helping them make decisions and all that. But in a 2011 solo show that Corey Taylor was doing, this is before he really got his solo career going. He was just doing a lot of the Q&A type things, the speaking engagements, playing some acoustic songs, stuff like that. But there was a show that he did in 2011 where he was asked again about Rick Rubin, where he very, very harshly reiterated his stance. I'll play a little bit of the clip right now. I'll probably trim it up for time. It is a little lengthy, but here's the clip.
Rick Rubin showed up for 45 minutes a week. Yeah. Rick Rubin would then, during that 45 minutes, lay on a couch, have a mic brought in next to his face so he wouldn't have to fucking move. Swear to God, oh yeah, you have no idea. And then he would be like, "Play it for me." The engineer would play it, he would go. And he had shades on the whole time. Never mind the fact that there's no sun in the room. It's all dark. You just look like an asshole at that point. And he would just go, he would stroke his huge beard and try and get as much of the food out of it as he could. And he would just play it again. And then we get to 70 beat, stop. Do that over. I will say this. I respect what Rick Rubin has done. I respect the work that he has done in the past to get to where he is now. But, this is a huge but, this is a J-Lo sized but. I will say this, the Rick Rubin of today is a thin shadow of the Rick Rubin that he was. He is overrated, he is overpaid, and I will never work with him
in more recent years, though, Corey definitely softened his stance on working with Rubin. There was an interview with Apple Music that he did a few years ago where he apologized. He blamed his feelings on the experience of working with Rubin on being newly sober at the time, also being an insecure singer at that point in his career. He also said that at some point he does hope to make amends with Rick Rubin. But, you know, I will point out that throughout all of the criticism, Corey has on multiple occasions praised Greg Fiddleman, who has been known to work a lot with Rick Rubin over the years. He worked with Rubin on Volume 3, The Subliminal Verses, and according to Corey, he was a lot more present, a lot more hands-on. Obviously, hands-on is not really something that Rick Rubin is known for, and Fiddleman actually went on to produce both Point 5, The Great Chapter, and We Are Not Your Kind without Rubin. I think one of the more shocking quote-unquote feuds between Rick Rubin and an artist is Slayer. Slayer was on Rubin's label Def Jam way back in the day before eventually becoming American Recordings. And the relationship goes back to Rain and Blood in 1986, all the way up to the band's second to last album, World Painted Blood, in 2009. Very, very long relationship, and the split between Slayer and Rick Rubin, it first came to light in between World Painted Blood and Repentless. This was in 2013, where Kerry King and Tom Araya did an interview with Fuse. And mind you, this is just about, that interview was December 2013. Jeff Hanneman died in May of 2013, so this is just 6-7 months after Hanneman's passing. But anyways, in that Fuse interview, Kerry King confirmed that Slayer was at that time unsigned when he said, "The funny thing is, we're not even signed to a record label right now. If we were on American, I'm sure Rick Rubin would be in the mix." Tom Araya then jumped in and added, "I asked our manager to reach out to him, but with no response or reply. Yeah, so that's kind of sad." Very, very quickly after that Fuse interview came out, Slayer's management actually jumped in with a statement to expand on what Kerry King and Tom Araya said in that Fuse interview, where the management said, in part, "It is true that Slayer is currently out of contract as they delivered their final required album to American Recordings some time ago. Rick Rubin began a new distribution agreement with Universal last year, and American Universal absolutely has made a significant proposal to re-sign the band. Both parties had been in substantial negotiation over that proposal at the time of Jeff's passing, and in fairness to everyone, a little space has been given on all sides in terms of closing any new deal. We are excited about the possibility of re-signing with Rick Rubin's venture and are also considering several other options that have been presented since the previous long-term contract with American expired." So at that time, at the end of 2013, management made it sound like it was possible that Rick Rubin and Slayer could potentially work together again on what would end up becoming Repentless a couple of years later. But when the time finally came to do that album, the band did get an offer from American Recordings, but according to Kerry King in an interview that he did with Metal Hammer, solidarity is far stronger than jumping ship and going somewhere else. I thought we'd still be on American, but when we got the offer from American, I was insulted. That to me just said, good luck. You're not going to have good luck here anymore. So we found our new friends at Nuclear Blast. And then right around the release of Repentless, Tom Araya was doing an interview with Rock Hard magazine, which is definitely not what it sounds like it could be. But anyways, in that interview, he said that even though Rubin wouldn't offer a deal that was comparable to that of Nuclear Blast or some of the other offers that they had received from various other labels, they did ask if Rubin would at least produce the album, and Rubin said that he only wanted to work on a few songs. The band did not want that, and ultimately they ended up hiring Terry Date. Moving on now to Black Sabbath, who hired Rick Rubin for what would turn out to be their final album, 13, and their first with Ozzy since Never Say Die back in 1978. Although the Sabbath and Rubin collaboration actually began in 2001, the two started working together on a record at that time, but the process was halted because Ozzy needed to go finish his solo album, Down to Earth. Anyways, so they reconvened for 13 in 2013. The album comes out, some very solid reviews. I think it went to #1, with the only major critique of the record being that Rubin mixed it too loud, which is definitely something he's been accused of doing on other albums, including Death Magnetic from Metallica and Red Hot Chili Peppers with Californication. Other than that, though, everything seemed all good until almost 10 years after the album was released. Geezer Butler in 2022 was doing an interview on Trunk Nation with Eddie Trunk, where he reflected on the experience of working with Rick Rubin, where he said, "Some of it I liked, some of it I didn't like particularly. It was a weird experience, especially with being told to forget that you're a heavy metal band. That was the first thing Rick said to us. He played us our very first album and he said, cast your mind back to then when there was no such thing as heavy metal or anything like that, and pretend it's the follow-up album to that, which is a ridiculous thing to think." Eddie Trunk then jumped in and pointed out that there were plenty of artists that weren't exactly thrilled with their experiences working with Rick Rubin, to which Geezer Butler replied, "I still don't know what he did. It's like, yeah, that's good. No, don't do that." And you go, "Why?" And he'd say, "Just don't do it." I think Ozzy one day went nuts because he had done like 10 different vocals, and Rick kept saying, "Yeah, that's great, but do another one." And Ozzy was like, "If it's great, why am I doing another one?" He just lost it, and that's the way it was. Tony wasn't happy with some of the stuff he was trying to make him play. He was making Tony get 1968 amps, as if that's going to make it sound like back in 1968. It's mad, but it's good for publicity, and it's good for the record company. If you've got Rick Rubin involved, then it must be good, kind of thing. A year prior to that, in 2021, Tony Iommi was talking with Spin when he was asked if he learned anything from working with Rick Rubin, where he hilariously responds, "Yeah, I learned how to lie on the couch with a mic in my hand and say, 'Next.' It was just different the way he works. He wanted to find the original Sabbath sound. He said, 'Have you got your original amps?' I said, 'Rick, that was 50 years ago. Do you have any amps from 50 years ago? I don't have them. They've blown up. They're gone long ago. I've got my own amps now.' He said, 'No, we need the old stuff.' So I get to the studio and there are 20 different bloody amps there. He goes, 'They're vintage amps.' I said, 'That doesn't mean they sound good. They're just old.' He went, 'Well, let's try them.' I tried them and I didn't like any of them. So it was a bit of a backwards and forwards till he got used to me and I got used to him, really. But we did it and the album was very basic. I had done a lot of the songs from the last album in my studio at home. I thought the sound was better, to be honest, but there was more stuff involved. I put more instruments on it. He just wanted it very bare and very basic, which, you know, was good." Jumping now to Velvet Revolver and their second album, Libertad, which was supposed to be produced by Rick Rubin, but was not. It was ultimately produced by Brendan O'Brien. And we didn't really exactly have the full story of what happened between Velvet Revolver and Rick Rubin until 10 years after the album came out. In 2017, guitarist Dave Kushner did an interview with the Appetite for Distortion podcast where he explained what happened by saying, "I just don't think we were ready to make a record when we made Libertad. When we did that one, we started with Rick Rubin. He has a very laid-back way of making records. You just write a bunch of shit, you record it, he listens to it, and he goes, 'Oh, that thing's good. Why don't you work on that some more?' When he thinks you're ready, he'll say, 'All right, let's make a record.' But we were getting really impatient. At the time, he charged at 2 different tiers for new bands and established bands. Because we were a new band in our minds, we thought we would get the cheaper rate, and we got the more expensive rate." Scott flipped out. He was like, "Fuck that. I'll fucking call Brendan O'Brien right now." He literally called Brendan, and Brendan was available in like a week and was like, "All right, I'll come out." That's literally how we switched producers, and the band agreed to do it because we were getting impatient too. We were like, "All right, Brendan's great too. Let's do it." What I will say, though, in defense of Rick Rubin and his pricing model, I mean, Velvet Revolver, not a new band. I mean, yes, I guess a newer band, kind of, but it's a super group. I mean, you're talking 3/5 of Guns N' Roses, fucking Scott Weiland from STP, Contraband, their first album went double platinum, so not exactly a new band. Anyways, though, we'll wrap this one up with Red Hot Chili Peppers, namely Josh Klinghoffer, who, of course, during his time in the band did 2 albums with them. I'm With You in 2011, which was produced by Rick Rubin, and then The Getaway in 2016, which was produced by Danger Mouse. And much like with Slayer, the relationship between the Chili Peppers and Rick Rubin goes way back, all the way back to Blood Sugar Sex Magic back in 91. But anyways, though, in 2022, Josh Klinghoffer did a review with Vinyl Writer Music, where he was very, very harsh on the producers of both of the records that he did with the Chili Peppers, but especially a bit more harsh on Rubin, where he said, "I'm incredibly conflicted about my output with that band because I feel like in both circumstances, producers got in the way of us truly making great music or a great record. I like almost all of the songs that we wrote together, but seldom did we capture them in the best way. I feel Rick Rubin was way more a hindrance than a help. He told me once, I just want to help the songs be the best they can be. I should have said, well, then get your driver to come and get you." Josh then goes on to add that The Getaway was produced by Danger Mouse because he didn't want to work with Rick Rubin again, which, I gotta say, I am a little surprised that Josh Klinghoffer had that much say during his time in the Chili Peppers. But what I do want to point out is that since he left the band, the 2 albums that the Chili Peppers have put out without him were produced by Rick Rubin, so they returned to Rubin after all that, Unlimited Love and Return of the Dream Canteen, so obviously he was the minority and not liking Rick Rubin. There's probably more out there, but those are the most notable ones that I wanted to get to in rock and metal in terms of artists that had issues working with Rick Rubin. But I do want to also point out too that that's where most of the criticism of Rubin comes from, is in the world of rock and metal. When you look at almost everybody else that he's worked with, especially in hip hop and things like that, highly, highly revered. Obviously, Rick Rubin, certainly a legend. And, this is, these are just a few people that had issues. I mean, I think for every Rick Rubin hater or criticizer, if that's even a word, there's 100 people to praise him. So, very, very divisive, I guess, in the worlds of rock and metal, but that's about it. Everywhere else, Rick Rubin is almost universally praised. But that's all I got for you for right now. Thanks so much for hanging out. Feel free to drop a like and subscribe below if you feel like it, and I will see you next time.